Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to the Caribbean Sustainability and Prosperity, Climate Finance as a Driver for Climate Action. I'm really excited to be talking to you today and to sharing with you this fantastic panel that we have. We're coming to you live from COP26, and the focus of today's discussion has been the focus of COP, which is climate finance and how we can make more possible by being innovative. Certainly, small island developing states have been at the center of the discussion and our vulnerability as well as our level of innovation. And so when talking about innovation, we immediately thought about the Clara Lionel Foundation and the work that they've been doing. And so with that, I'd like to welcome you all to the discussion today. I'll ask you to, yes, please introduce yourselves in the chat and tell us what country you're from. And anything that you're hoping to gain out of today's discussion will be really, really helpful. We'll also ask you to ask any questions that you have in the Q&A. So if you have any questions, once we get to the end of the discussion, we will answer those in the Q&A section of the webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce Justine Lucas. She is the director of the Clara Lionel Foundation, doing absolutely amazing work across the region and across the globe. And so I'll ask her to just start by giving us some grounding in about the Clara Lionel Foundation and what they're doing.
Hi, Racquel. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here with you all and with such a wonderful group of panelists. The Clara Lionel Foundation was founded by Rihanna back in 2012. And the mission of our organization is to shift how the world responds to the effects of climate change through emergency preparedness and community resilience initiatives. Our work centers strategically on two pillars: climate resilience, which includes emergency response, and justice, and we focus on the Caribbean. The primary vehicle for this work is the Climate Resilience Initiative, which is focused on essentially what we all here are focused on: how can the Caribbean become a climate resilient zone that can be a model for the rest of the world. For us, this initiative is a multi-year pan-Caribbean initiative with an initial funding target of 25 million, which I wanted to bring up just because we were talking about financing. And we focus on specifically the climate resilience of critical facilities. So we, as a moderately sized nonprofit organization, we're looking at how can we contribute to the climate resilience of the Caribbean. Historically, we'd engaged in emergency response to natural disasters, which lots of nonprofits do. Obviously, the Caribbean is disproportionately affected by natural disasters. And we felt like we were part of a model that, was not moving the dial. Our founder is obviously incredibly innovative, and we were looking for how can we contribute to the broader climate resilience of the region? How can we support communities before disasters occur? And we zeroed in on critical facilities. So looking at health clinics, schools as shelters, communications mechanisms, and how can we help support communities before a disaster occurs?
That is fantastic. So tell us about some of your projects, because I know we've been watching from the sidelines and we've really been in awe of your work and the focus of the foundation in that building of resilience across the region, especially as it relates to healthcare centers. And I'm seeing some really exciting guests joining us. Welcome to Therese and all of the others who are joining and saying hello in the chat, but thank you so much for joining us. But yes, Justine, please tell us about your work, because we're really so, I think the importance of having this conversation, especially with you, is that, at COP, we're talking about, the 100 billion that the developing world has promised needs to be mobilized. And we've fallen far behind. That's been promised for 15 years. But there is action and momentum taking place by private individuals who are just determined that we cannot wait on government. Government certainly needs to be a part of the solution, and they have to lead on certain policy decisions that need to be taken. But we have standouts like Rihanna, like Clara Lionel Foundation, that are accomplishing things on the ground to build and harden facilities that are critical to our ability to bounce back from a disaster.
Thanks, Racquel. That's a great question. I think, just thinking back on how we got to where we are, we started with research. So looking at how could we contribute to this space when you're looking at a region like the Caribbean, so many different countries, so many different challenges. We as a smaller nonprofit, how could philanthropy play a role in climate resilience? There is obviously a role for government. There's a role for government funding, but philanthropy plays this wonderful role of being able to de-risk this work. So pilot projects, invest in climate resilience when no one else is doing it. So we saw the opportunity to pilot projects such as the health clinics, then leverage advocacy to crowd in additional funding, put pressure on governments to take it to the next level. So that's really kind of the theory of change of our work. And when it comes to these projects, they're very holistic. So if we're working on a health clinic, which for us, we've looked for clinics that are in more rural areas, that are in more marginalized communities. And honestly, we started with reproductive health clinics. So looking at that intersection of climate resilience and women's rights, which not a lot of folks are playing in, we harden the clinics to withstand natural disasters. We equip them with renewable energy. We take a holistic look at other needs to make sure that communities before, during, and after disasters, can move through that and have access to critical services. We took the same approach with schools, which it's essentially a shelters model, but in the Caribbean, oftentimes it's schools, but it can be churches, it can be other infrastructure, but looking at how can communities have a safe place to go, and for schools, having children get returned to education as soon as possible after a disaster. And the last pillar of our work is communications. We have this beautiful partnership between University of West Indies and UCLA, and we're really digging into strengthening and integrating information ecosystems and technology for improved emergency communications. So that is another piece of our work, this continuous research and looking at how we can help support moving the dial. And in terms of specific projects, because our work is pan-Caribbean, we are working on in many countries. We obviously have a strong propensity for working in Barbados just because our founder is from there. So we have a number of projects on that island, but we also have projects in Dominica, Dominican Republic, Belize, and every year adding on more countries and building more partnerships across the Caribbean.
Great, great. So what would you attribute your success to? I know you've talked a lot about the research and the research leading to taking specific action and looking at where there's a gap in the market. And I think that's such a brilliant approach because there are so many things that need to be done, and figuring out where to focus is sometimes half the battle. So how is it? Is it the partnerships? Is it the research? Is it a combination? Is it, de-risking projects so that your funding can be catalytic in terms of making sure that projects are proven and then government can take it the last mile? Tell us a little bit about what you think you would attribute a lot of your success to and the work that you've been able to do.
I'd say probably it would start with a strong theory of change. I think donors want to see an end goal. And I think the work that we are all trying to do is really systemic. It's not about putting a Band-Aid on these issues. It's about how do we change the way that we're operating. So I think that there's something that is attractive about that, of having this end goal of the Caribbean being a model for the rest of the world. I would say also it's leverage. One example that comes to mind that's very recent is the earthquake in Haiti. CLF still engages in emergency response, especially when there's a particularly niche need, just because we have a lot of relationships in the Caribbean and we can mobilize funding. So I would say, with Haiti, we were able to pull together a funding round where our initial funding was $500,000 to 6 Haitian-led local organizations. And we were able to mobilize that funding very quickly and put it out the door, because we found these incredible organizations, which you could see in the media, and a lot of the giving was to international NGOs. Given the historic context of Haiti, we felt passionately about listening locally and finding organizations that were already on the ground. And because we were able to mobilize the funding and find this wonderful group of organizations, we were able to leverage that. So we were able to attract 2 other major foundations, giving us an additional $700,000, which we were able to mobilize and give out. So I think leverage is a key part of our work. Collaborative financing is also something that's happening a lot right now. So our ability to engage in that currently and help mobilize those funds and drive them towards the Caribbean is something else that I think is setting us apart.
Yeah. So how do you, and I mean, I think it's such an interesting point about talking about the difference between, avoiding disasters and loss and focusing on, responding to disasters, because there's a need for both. How do you balance both things and determine, because, we're all in a situation where there are finite resources. So how do we decide, okay, we're only going to focus on emergency response, and doing that is at the expense of avoiding disaster by being more resilient. And then, focusing on avoiding disaster is at the expense of emergency response, which is, there is an immediate need. How do you decide on, how to focus in that way?
It's a great question. I think we've been on a journey and have evolved in that parallel universe of those two pieces. I'd say, we used to do emergency response primarily because that was our area of expertise. That was something we'd done historically. But then once we realized that we could play this meaningful role around climate resilience, we developed a strong strategy that is focused on climate resilience. Essentially, we have a budget line item, in that strategy every year towards when there are extreme examples of folks in the Caribbean being impacted by a natural disaster, where we have already established partnerships, where we have those relationships on the ground. If we see that there's a gap, like we do have budget to respond, but the primary focus of our work is on climate resilience, and we are not deterred by the emergencies that continue to happen. It's just that the reality is it keeps getting worse. So I think having a strong strategy in place that is very focused on, really the number of countries we are moving into, the funding that we are allocating, I think that's helped keep us on track. And I guess I would encourage other organizations to, if thinking about climate resilience in a serious way, to make it a strategic priority.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, we can only continue to respond to the disasters for so long, because, that will be all that we have the capacity to do if we don't strengthen the infrastructure to make sure that there are in fact fewer disasters, or we are more resilient post-disaster. So I completely commend taking that focus. You also mentioned, looking at work, supporting international organizations versus supporting organizations on the ground. And I want you to take me through that journey a little bit more, because I think that is something that I think it's a thought process that I think we need to take others on, because there always is so much support for the large international organizations. I'm not saying that that's bad in any way, but I think that there are also sort of folks on the ground who are doing great work that also need support, who are more sort of immediate in their ability to provide assistance. So tell me about, how you decided on that, and what would you say to others who are sort of grappling with big international organization or on the ground organization that is, more hands-on?
It's a great question, Racquel. It feels like it's a question that is sort of in the reality of now. I think we're all conscious of, this drive and this motivation to fund as hyper local as possible. But I do see in the philanthropy space, there is a resistance to it still.
Yeah.
I think if there's one message I could drive home today is like, it is possible to engage in trust-based philanthropy, and it is possible to vet organizations thoroughly and recognize that there is potentially additional risk in investing locally, because you are sometimes a little bit removed. But I would say, our founder, her reputation and the profile of our organization, we have to weigh all of that very seriously. and we are still able to fund locally. We're still able to find these incredible organizations. Maybe it is taking a little bit more risk, but it's risks that needs to be taken. We need to listen and learn from communities, and when the way that the emergency response model is set up, this idea of folks flying in and then as an outsider assessing the needs, it just feels like it feels inauthentic to me, and I hope that more and more organizations, foundations, nonprofits find ways to find these community-based organizations, or at least engage in collaborative philanthropy with the organizations that have found them.
Is it that you guys did the work up front to be able to form the relationships, so at the time of disaster, you're not looking to sort of figure out and do sort of the investigation and the due diligence at that point, because you already have the relationship coming into the disaster, and so you have the ability to now just activate that relationship versus starting from scratch when things are in the midst of chaos?
100%. We didn't step into emergency response in the Caribbean lightly, and the Climate Resilience Initiative has involved a great depth of research of all of the countries, all of the partners that exist. We've done this over years, so we already have a strong bedrock of research. But maybe to go to the Haiti example, CLF had already been scoping out Climate Resilience Initiative projects in Haiti over the past year. So we've been talking to partners, we've been exploring projects, we've been listening, and just doing our research. So when this horrific earthquake occurred, we were in close dialogue with folks already. So having those relationships is really what it's all about, and has allowed us to move quickly and find these community-based organizations.
Perfect. I love it. I love it. All right. So, the work that you do is incredibly expensive, and it's most often executed by leveraging other sources of capital. Can you tell us about how you work through determining who those partners would be?
Yeah, for us, we look at mostly individuals and foundations.
Okay.
Like any nonprofit, we are, always searching for funding, and we have a high funding target for the Climate Resilience Initiative. So we are looking for individuals that are passionate about climate resilience, about the Caribbean, even those, interested in emergency response, or those that have engaged in emergency response. How do we take them on the spectrum towards climate resilience? So that is a lot of conversations with individuals, and then foundations. Historically, there are a number of foundations that have worked in the Caribbean, or are based in the Caribbean, and we look to see how our work aligns with those foundations, and we have been able to unlock funding from some of the big ones. We have a great partnership with Open Society. We have a partnership with Elma Philanthropy's Pantareya Foundation, some really powerful organizations that have worked in the Caribbean for some time. And so I think for us, it's been a combination of the two. I know that there are other sources of funding, corporates, governments. These are things that we continue to work on. But I have to say, Racquel, it has been a journey of taking funders from a space where they love to give to emergency response. They love to wait till the disaster occurs and respond in that week, to a place of, helping them understand that they can support communities year round. They can support communities now in the face of disasters to come. So it has been quite the journey in getting donors on board, but we have had success. And I think it really starts with that theory of change, of really the vision of the Caribbean being this model for the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think it's so exciting. It's so tempting to just be involved in emergency response, but then it's a spiral to nowhere, because then that's all we'll ever get done. And so I really think that your work is an example of so many other foundations to follow, and that's what we'd like to see: a lot more focus on building our resilience and using innovative capital in doing that. So speaking of innovative capital, I would imagine that you use a lot of other philanthropic funding and grant funding? Is there any other kind of funding that you mobilize through your work?
I think the only other thing I would highlight besides individuals and foundations is the importance of advocacy. So we having a voice as a founder, we're able to engage in advocacy towards governments. We haven't done much in the corporate space, but leveraging our projects, leveraging the work that we believe in, we have been able to successfully unlock government funding just broadly for these issues. So I think that there's a role to play for that. I'd also say, we have incredible partners. We are not going at this alone. It is a very collaborative space. So, we are working with local clinics who have their own budgets and their own priorities. And we've been in partnerships with local health clinics where they are contributing as well to the project. So this collaborative financing is not just when big foundations and high net worth individuals, there is belief in these projects at a local level. So seeing that level of contribution, even if it, albeit small, like has been powerful. And then, we work with other nonprofits in the region, including Rocky Mountain Institute and, incredible engineers and, other nonprofits. It really takes, these projects are bringing together a really, exciting mix of partners. And sometimes there are funding collaborations happening within that mix, which I think is exciting.
I'm going to ask you one last question before I bring in the rest of the panel, because I really wanted to have this sort of upfront chat, because I think the level of innovation in the work that you're doing is quite exciting. Do you value the advocacy that you're doing? Because I would imagine that in addition to the actual, funding that you put in and the funding that you're able to leverage, the value of your advocacy is huge. Rihanna's voice, she can say one thing and move markets. So do you sort of also take stock of our advocacy has this value, or do you just sort of take that as par for the course and part of what you're doing?
I would say powerful advocacy has to be incredibly strategic. I think sometimes advocacy is seen as awareness. So there is power in our founder's voice, but her just lifting up the issues is not oftentimes moving the dial. So we oftentimes get requests where it's just bring a spotlight to one issue. And she does that all the time in her own way. But I feel like powerful advocacy is about the work that we're trying to do, unlock additional funding for climate resilience, or unlock additional funding for, historically, we've worked in the global education space. And so we are incredibly strategic with that advocacy. Sometimes it is closed door meetings. Again, the power of relationship building to move the dial. Sometimes it is very public social media call outs, but we put a lot of value into the power of that. And we only, as CLF, try to leverage our voice when it can be really getting something over the line, really helping us secure a massive amount of additional funding. For us, advocacy isn't awareness. It really is about how do we really move the dial on these issues. So we value her voice extremely. And she also is her own person. So she obviously is, doing her own social media, working on these issues in her own way. But it's definitely not something to be taken lightly. And we're so grateful to have her as our founder, as someone that's so passionate and driven about this work. We're very lucky.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to introduce David next. David Gumbs from Rocky Mountain Institute, a partner of ours and a partner of CLF. David, I'm going to ask you to come on camera and to tell us a little bit about the work of Rocky Mountain Institute.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hi, Racquel. Thank you. Happy to be here today and talk a little bit about RMI and the work we do. RMI is a nonprofit organization that is focused on transforming global energy. The purpose is to transform it to a clean, prosperous source of energy that is accessible for all. And at the end of the day, what that translates to is some of the very specific work I do And that work, I am a director of our Islands Energy Program. So we focus much of our work in the Caribbean Basin, and that work is working, partnering with a number of entities, private sector, government, and philanthropic organizations, and other players in this space to advance the sort of common cause, which is to make our world a better place for all of us to live and have a cleaner source of energy generation.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. Charlin Bodley from CCREEE, also one of our partners, and would love for you to tell us about CCREE's work and how you're involved.
Thank you, Racquel, and good morning, good day, good afternoon to everyone. I am Charlin Bodley, Project Development and Gender Expert with the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. The center was formally established and became operational in May of 2018. So we may be considered sort of the new kids on the block, but by no means is that an indication of the power of the center and the role that it will play in transitioning the energy sector in our Caribbean region. In fact, the CCREEE is the implementation hub, and to date, the only organization solely responsible for implementation of sustainable energy and that transition. And like David said, at the end of all of that, and very fresh and very present in everything that we do, is our impact on the lives of our Caribbean people. And we want to achieve that through climate resilient, affordable, and sustainable energy supply throughout our region. Our work is incorporated through 7 strategic program areas. But out of 4 of all that we do, we have 3 flagship programs that we focus on. And so our 7 strategic program areas feed into that. And these 3 include our IRRPs, that is our integrated resource and resilience planning, and of course planning within the energy sector, especially now to include the parameters of resilience to ensure that as we transition, that countries are able to account for vulnerabilities in these large investments that we're trying to encourage, that parameter is taken into account. And so coming out of that planning process for our member states, we expect to have investment portfolios of projects. And that leads us therefore to our second program, which is our Project Preparation Facility, our PPF, that now takes on projects and really pushes them through the pipeline, through technical assistance and technical services that we apply to these projects, getting them to a point of being investment mature. And I'm sure as we progress in our conversation, we will speak a lot about the need for that type of service through the CCREEE. And lastly, our third star program, I would say, is our CEKH, and that is our CARICOM Energy Knowledge Hub that serves as a data repository and a platform that we can have an exchange of knowledge and best practices, etc. So these 3 programs put together, incorporating also our other 7 strategic program areas, really is what we use as our model to serve our region and to transition our energy sector.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Charlin. And then Ray, if you could please introduce yourself. So the accelerator just launched its financial advisory committee. And I must say, we got probably the most enthusiastic response from Ray and Republic Bank. And it was really exciting because they already have a program around resilience and climate finance. And so we're really excited to learn from them, not only because we want to work with them on providing more funding and matching more projects with funding, but also because of the level of work that they've already undertaken to understand the landscape and to solve some of the systemic issues that we have as a region. So Ray, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Republic Bank and their work in this space.
Thank you, Racquel. Good morning to everyone. As Racquel pointed out, my name is Klein. I'm a proud member of the Republic Bank Group. We operate in 14 jurisdictions throughout the Caribbean, as far south as Guyana, as far north as BVI and Cayman, which I reside in right now, and as far west as Ghana in West Africa, actually. So we're kind of pan-Caribbean in a sense. As Racquel alluded to, over the past year, I've really had the honor of working with my colleagues in our organization in making meaningful steps towards our sustainability initiatives across all of our territories. Our strategy is really to develop, I think, responsible and innovative banking products that meet the needs of our clients. And so we've taken a couple steps that I'll highlight. The first one, which was in 2020, we became, I think, the only signatory to date from the Caribbean to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Banking. Effectively, we've made a pledge to do banking in a responsible way to make sure that we're making a positive and meaningful impact to the societies in which we operate. And then in April of 2021, we joined a group of global banks in founding the Net Zero Banking Alliance. Again, being the only representative from the Caribbean, our commitment, along with the other commitments of banks, represent something around $40 trillion in assets in terms of mobilizing assets to achieving net zero by 2050. And then subsequent to that, in June, we announced our own ambitious climate finance goal, which is really geared towards financing activities that reduce the impacts of climate really in the jurisdictions in which we operate, but really everywhere in the world. That includes obviously renewable energy projects, financing of electric vehicles, energy efficiencies, and a myriad of other different things, which I'll mention later. So we've taken some meaningful steps. I'll share a lot more with you guys in the discussion today, but that was just to give you an overview of some of the things that we would have recently done in terms of our commitment to climate change.
Okay, I love it. And I hope and we'll talk about this through the discussion, I hope you're bringing your fellow banks on this journey with you and engaging them to say, listen, this is what we've done, join us, especially on the commitment to net zero. I think that is so important that we have everyone on board with getting to net zero. So I'm going to ask David, Charlin, and Justine to come back on camera, and we're going to start the conversation about, what do we think is the primary challenge facing sort of project throughput in the region? Why aren't we seeing enough renewable energy projects? And I think if you disagree and you think, what we're seeing enough, and we're going to start with renewable energy, but just in general, why aren't we seeing enough new projects or enough projects to help us in our transition? Any takers?
I'm happy to take a stab at it.
You're going to jump in? All right.
I can look at it from a couple of different perspectives. In my role as CEO of Anglo Electricity Company, I think it sort of helped me to see both sides of the equation and the role that I'm playing now with RMI to advance the progress of renewable energy in the region. From operationally, I think, at least from my perspective, a lot of it goes back to the availability, the capacity that's available in order to make the transition happen. I think it starts there.
And when you talk about capacity, tell me specifically what kind of capacity.
Yeah, so we can talk about sort of human capacity and the availability of financial resources in that same context, and it's both. And one is when you have sort of a lack of limited financial resources and you have to choose where to put those resources, you're going to choose the easier route and the route that brings you the immediate sort of outcome or success, and that's energy generation from a utility perspective, right? Mm-hmm. You want to do so, we all have the same slogans: reliably, efficiently, and economically. But at the end of the day, doing it the way we did and do still in the region has significant impact on our lives. All right, we're contributing to impacting the health of us and our citizens, ourselves, and we're contributing to the damage to the larger climate. And with that said, we have the ambition to be leaders in this space. And I think there's so much potential for us to do that. If we bring the two things, one is access to finance, all right? And if we use some of that same financial resource to help build the numbers on the bench or, in the game, I think that will unlock a lot more interest and a lot more passion and energy around this whole transition.
All right, Charlin, I know your project preparation is meant to do just that. So tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll go to Ray in terms of what you're seeing on the ground when looking at funding projects.
Oh, thanks, Racquel. And I will definitely echo the sentiments expressed by David. In fact, in setting up our facility, we did engage in a needs assessment, and we found that exactly the first 2 points that he mentioned were the top 2 reasons we found that the people, especially the private sector, had shied away from renewable energy projects. One, there really isn't the human capacity across the board for projects to be developed to a point of attracting financing. One thing is for sure, while I think globally we're not there yet in terms of how much financing is made available to our vulnerable, especially our small island developing states, there is some level of climate financing that is available, but we've not been able to tap into it and let that translate into the deployment of projects. So apart from the human resources, the respondents to our survey through the private sector, also the public sector, would have signaled the lack of the right financial tools. So our financial institutions building capacity, even among our financial institutions, that they understand entire context of renewable energy, and so can become a little less averse to the risk, or better able to manage the risk, the inherent risk of renewable energy development. That is also lacking. And so our facility has been set up to counter some of these challenges and barriers that we've uncovered by targeting several players. So not only do we provide services to the project developer, and of course that is the first point of contact, I would say, within the facility, so that a project developer, project owner, within a private or public sector, or even a PPP, can come into the facility, and we could, while providing that technical service, there is an element of building that capacity, so that that can generate a domino effect, that more projects could therefore be developed on the ground. And then once these projects reach to the end of the pipeline and they're deemed investment mature, we understand now that our role also extends to building capacity with the financial institutions, so that a financial institution can adequately assess a project, or can make a calculated decision on investing in that project. And thirdly, I would say what I think is missing, and that the facility has adequately come in to provide that support, is some level of matchmaking. So even when you do have a bankable project, that mechanism that allows us to match these investment-ready projects to private investors and financiers, or to your commercial banks, development banks, I think that element is also quite important in helping us to get there. Lastly, I think I would say that, and I know it was Ray who mentioned sustainable transport. I think one thing that is missing, and while CCREEE may not necessarily do that directly through the facility, is something that we do through our other programs, but connecting the dots is so important, bringing together the right players, so that your policy makers and your utility companies, your private sector agencies, as long as we continue to look at these groups of players separately and proceed to build capacity in silos, then I think we're fighting a losing battle, because something like sustainable transport, transitioning to e-mobility, is really not simply a matter of replacing our ICE vehicles with electric vehicles. It's really, how does this impact our grid? How ready are our utilities to assist us in that transition? So I think in terms of that, that's where the facility comes into play, and the CCREEE in general.
So I'm gonna ask Ray to respond to that, but following that, I'm gonna ask Justine to also respond to that, in that, you know, a lot of Clara Lionel's work is sort of building the initial model and then getting sort of other players to then replicate the work because they've de-risked it. And so are they seeing enough of that uptake? Back to Charlin's point about, okay, you know, there is a role to be played with taking on projects once they've been proven. So Ray, I'll ask you to respond first, and then I'll go to you, Justine.
Yeah, so thanks, Racquel. I think one of the important things to note in terms of our experience so far, yeah, we've seen obviously a decrease in the activity in the renewable energy space, but let's not forget, I think that the last 2 years or year and a half has not been anything that I've witnessed in my lifetime. So I think, you know, it's difficult for me to kind of really place all the blame, I suppose, on the Caribbean at this particular point, where there were a lot of external factors obviously dictating some of the deal flow that we've been seeing. And it's not just in the renewable energy space, we've also seen it across all other sectors. Just activity as a whole is down. One of the things that I think we could do, and I'm happy to kind of match Charlene's activities or projects with debt financing. You know, I mentioned before, we have a specific goal, but one of the things I think that we haven't really been seeing in the region is, or we haven't been doing well, is learning from the examples that are actually, you know, we could effectively replicate. In my view, Barbados is the example. To some extent, Jamaica as well, from a utility scale perspective, but Barbados I think from the ability to really almost democratize renewable energy to the point where it becomes part of, you know, of the retail consumer could effectively, you know, put it up on their roof and they can get credits associated with that because they have the legislation in place. The banks understand the system, so it's no longer you know, a project that has to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. I could tell you right now in Barbados, if there's a renewable energy project, it almost has a automatic process that it goes through, versus some of the other jurisdictions. There's a whole litany of things that they actually have to kind of, you know, hoops to jump through. So why can't the other jurisdictions look at Barbados and say, why don't we just copy exactly what they did? They put a feed-in tariff in place. Obviously, the element of the off-taker, the Barbados Light and Power, the credit quality of that may not necessarily ring true to some of the other territories. But I still think the infrastructure in terms of the legal aspect was one of the most important things, because it then provides banks with some sense of security around lending into that particular segment, sector. So, you know, my view would be that I think until we're able to see, at least in a lot of the other jurisdictions, maybe a streamlining of the legislation to allow lenders to effectively take some comfort or to properly manage the risk, that, yeah, it's going to be on an ad hoc basis. It's probably going to be a situation where we assess, you know, projects based on the strength, the credit quality of the off-taker. And in many of those instances, that probably relies on external parties coming in. So I think they have to kind of create the legislative framework to actually allow a lot of this activity to really be elevated. Yeah,
but the legal and regulatory changes to legal and regulatory frameworks take time, and that is something that we do not have. But I'm going to go to Justine now, because I think there is a role to be played for, listen, we've proven this can work, we've done it, take it and run with it and replicate it. And then, you know, I'll move from there to ask David about, you know, how does RMI operate, especially in those legal and regulatory challenges? Because we don't have the option of waiting until the legal and regulatory environment changes. So how do we sort of create models to replicate, and what kind of uptake have you seen in that, Justine? And then David, how do you operate in the existing environment?
Thank you, Racquel. I would say, you know, from a CLF perspective, the renewable energy sector is not necessarily our area of expertise, but the transition to renewables across the Caribbean has to happen in parallel to the climate resilience work. It has to be a component. The reason our partnership with RMI flourished is we saw the role in this interim of equipping critical facilities with renewables. So while we're figuring out the model of de-risking and scaling these projects, taking on whole islands, making sure that critical facilities are equipped, it was central to the partnership. I have to say that what I have learned about the space is, so many of these partners on this call and working in this space are looking at the transition of whole islands. I think there has been piecemeal work that's been great, and Barbados is definitely a shining example thanks to Prime Minister Mia Mottley's leadership. But I think this idea of moving whole islands to being fully renewable is incredibly compelling. Again, looking at models that are attractive to funders, I think RMI has a great way of looking at how can philanthropy play a de-risking role in doing all the scoping of what's necessary, working with local utilities, looking at legislation, how can that happen, and then create a model that attracts impact investors, other funders, banks. I think there's something about that systemic change that I think is really attractive. And I just hope that we have, to Ray's point, like more models that can then be replicated. So the great hope is that there are whole islands that make that transition. Then not only the financing of how that was possible, but then looking at the regulatory framework of what that looked like and then replicating it across the Caribbean. I just feel like it's a model that could work, and the Caribbean's just a ripe area for it to happen. So I feel very hopeful.
Good. I share your optimism, David. So tell us a little bit about how RMI operates, especially considering that these barriers are here and aren't going away, and we want to ensure that all of the players have an opportunity to make sure that things are continuing to move forward and to progress, and there is momentum.
Yeah, and I wish I could describe that in one quick 1 or 2 sentences, and I'll do my best. But essentially, the way RMI operates is we try to solve problems, right? So RMI has been operating in the region for quite some time. I think a little bit over 7 years, and we've worked with at this point, I think about 18 different countries across the region. So we have a good sense for what works where, and we've seen the variation of models. We've seen the Barbados model, we've seen the Bermuda model, and the Anguilla model. And they all differ so significantly. And you heard some of the models discussed earlier. So what we try to basically understand when we go into a country is we try to understand the existing environment, and we meet that environment, we meet the people where they are, and we try to find solutions. And things vary from country to country, but I'll explain it this way and maybe give a couple of examples. In Bermuda, we do a lot of work in Bermuda, both in the electricity transformation and also in the vehicle transformation, transition into EVs. And we help to basically identify the challenges and the barriers and de-risk and mitigate those challenges as we move along through the process. Sometimes it takes a longer time, but sometimes we have a lot of early successes. An example of that would be if there's a particular regulatory change that needs to happen, we're not going to go and promote the change of the entire regulatory system. That takes a long time, as you expressed. We may look for certain particular clauses that could be inserted in the existing framework to enable the transition. We've had examples of that in the Bahamas, where we were able to launch very different and unique projects. But what that allows us to do is use that project as the example to scale up and get more projects done in a particular region. And then we use the lessons learned. So we've had the experience in the region. We use those lessons and the ideas and concepts that our partners bring to the table, and we say, okay, what are the needs and how can we support these needs? We look for philanthropic support. That's a major source of how we do this. And then we also look for support from governments, and we look for support from partners, other philanthropy or not-for-profit or other entities that are in the same line of work or have a similar interest and goal. And we try to, leverage those resources to make impact. And one of the things that we do, for example, I described the capacity challenges on the operational side. Well, we see that as a challenge, and we now have launched a Energy Transition Academy. The Energy Transition Academy is essentially to work with our partners in the region, and we're going to scale that up as we go along, but to identify specific capacity needs in terms of persons and their specific needs. So, there's capacity needed, a whole host, maybe 100, 200 elements across the process of getting a project to success. But we'll fill this very specific gap so that we can leverage those resources to make more things happen. And when we're not there, those individuals are continuing to work locally, and capacity is built locally, and therefore we get more momentum. We also realize that there is a challenge accessing finance in the region. And this is something that we're doing globally, by the way. I'm just using the Caribbean examples because that's my area of focus. But we've launched the Climate Finance Access Network, which essentially allows us with our partners across the Global South to work specifically, train up individuals in country from those countries to access these funds that are widely available, but we just can't get, to de-risk and plan and initiate all these great projects that are already in the pipeline. Our assessment, and from across the work we do, we have roughly 80 megawatts of projects that are literally de-risked or close to being completed in the de-risking process and ready to go to market. So we have to be able to match those projects with available financing so that we're not stalled and that we can continue the transition.
And just as a point of clarification, that 80 megawatts, how many projects is that approximately?
That's probably a good 20 plus projects, and they're various stages of the de-risking process.
All right, I'm going to come back to you, Ray, because what I want to understand then is what can we do? How can we support private capital, getting involved in these markets? I know that you guys are doing a lot of work, but is it that we need external guarantees? Would that help? While we work on the issue of the regulatory environment, which I think 100% needs to be solved, because we're not going to get this working at maximum capacity unless we do that. But what are some of the other things that can sort of support project uptake? And then I'm going to go to Charlin to talk to you about what are some of the challenges that you see in the projects that you guys have looked at initially in terms of being ready for funding. What are some of the sort of systemic issues?
Yeah, so I think our experience has been obviously that we do see that there's obviously some need for technical assistance, whether it be on the project developer side, really helping them to either piece together some of the analysis that needs to be farmed out to the lenders, or really to put together the structures. I think part of it is that there's some kind of capacity gap there. We also see there are gaps in, and I hate to keep coming back to this point, in terms of the government, the ultimate ones that award contracts or they're involved in regulatory environments. I don't know if it's maybe in their respective line ministries, if they have the adequate resources that are needed, but generally things take quite some time in terms of turning out any approvals that are required. From a lending perspective, I could tell you, we can turn around a credit in 4 to 6 weeks. I don't really think that I know people like to beat up on the banks, but I really don't think we're the issue here. I think there are pools of, and I'm not just speaking from my own institution. I know, I know some of my peers. Adam Carter at First Caribbean is also looking at this space. I know some of the other institutions are looking at this space quite actively. So I know we have dedicated pools of funds really set aside for projects, but oftentimes the structure that ultimately is presented to us does present some challenges. External guarantees, again, we don't mind taking the risk. And what I've often found with many of these guarantees is that if effectively they will not guarantee against what we want them to guarantee. So it becomes this kind of silly thing. Like we're willing to take the risk and we don't want a guarantee for that. But we, in situations where we're not comfortable taking certain risks, I think that's really where some of those guarantees should play. But oftentimes they're much more conservative than we are. So it doesn't necessarily quite help us. So then maybe patient capital. So maybe you need, you need some investors that they have a long view on this industry, and they're very patient to kind of develop it through this life cycle. So maybe part of that is to see how we could maybe incentivize some of these other guys to really come into this space.
Excellent. And no, when we did not bring you here to beat up on the banks, we brought you here to find solutions. But what I do want to understand is to what extent is there collaboration? And I know that there are all kinds of rules around how banks are able to work together, but to what extent is there collaboration? I'm going to make my first sort of name drop of the day, which is I met with a group of young activists and Nicola Sturgeon this morning, the First Minister of Scotland, and she was fabulous. And one of the young people, they said, in applying for climate finance, and they're talking about people like GCF and other organizations like that, the process is so complicated. And then each new entity that you apply to, it's a whole very new complicated process. To what extent do banks collaborate on this? These are our requirements for renewable energy or climate finance credit applications, so that at least for projects looking for funding, it is simpler for them. And the answer could be there is no collaboration, and I would understand if there isn't, but I was just curious.
Yeah, I think it depends on the gradient. So utility scale, typically that collaboration comes in the form of syndications. So oftentimes there's a lead bank or a lead arranger, and they'll engage their peer banks to kind of have discussions around what is the checklist of items that we need. I don't think that there's that level of collaboration that's happening kind of down the tier as you go down to the smaller size facilities, but it should be. These conversations should be elevated to the Bankers Association. I know the Caribbean Bankers Association has been having discussions around how they can really speak a little bit more about climate finance or climate financing as kind of a product and service for their representative banks. But I think it could be had at that level, which is really at the respective Bankers Association, to kind of figure out how and what form that takes. And then lastly, I think to some extent, I've seen, for example, in Cayman and Barbados, there were programs actually designed by the government, which allow that process to be streamlined. So for example, if the governments want to really promote some of this activity, there could be programs. I know, for example, in Trinidad, there was an SME program that the banks effectively agreed on an application, and anything that comes through is effectively the same application. It doesn't matter what bank you go to. And then quite recently in Cayman, I think they did one that was very similar for businesses that were going through disruption from COVID. So there could be some of that collaboration that happens, I think, through the Bankers Association, or sometimes directed by the governments.
Excellent. And so, Charlin, what are the challenges that you're seeing in the projects that you're looking at?
A lot of our challenges seem to be surrounding the capacity within the region in putting together even a simple concept on a sustainable energy project. And by sustainable energy, I refer to both renewable energy and energy efficiency projects, and we do offer services for nexus applications. I sort of stand somewhere in the middle of sort of the discussion that we've been having in terms of how much is that lack of that regulatory environment, how much is that adding to some of the challenges that we face is surely an issue. It is surely something that has to be addressed, and we've been speaking about it, I imagine, before I wore diapers. And so we continue in this discussion, but what I would say is we're at a point where we need to walk the walk while we talk the talk. And so I think our approach at the center is understanding some of these challenges where the regulatory environment is not quite suitable. The point is really to deploy, just deploy. And that's really the approach you're taking. I know Barbados has been mentioned as an example of a promised land, a good sustainable energy promised land. Quite certainly we see that in the applications that are coming forward to us. In fact, our first two projects that have been successfully inducted into our facility, and that we've just started the process of providing services to, are two large-scale solar projects in Barbados. And I imagine that the regulatory framework has supported that. But what we're seeing too is a lot of project concepts coming through with a site not even identified. And so we have a basic model. When you think of developing a renewable energy project, you think of a site. A site must be in order. You must have a project team. You must already think of capital, that the technology should be secure. And we're seeing a lot of gaps in some of these areas. One thing I could mention also is the fact that we stand ready to support emerging technologies, and that has been a particular challenge. For example, I think our region has long been an importer of technology, and we've long waited for the international community to get it together so that, we avoid the risk and we get it when it's mature. But I mean, look at our resources. We have ocean technologies, and we must be able to develop these technologies way ahead of the curve. We cannot wait for the international community to get it right. And so again, I think an important piece of the puzzle, and instead of looking at it as a challenge, I would say rather it is, I pose this for us as sort of a blueprint moving forward, that we must bring the pieces together. We have regional universities. Our universities need to be part of developing the technology and encouraging innovation and removing some of these barriers. And until these things happen together, and again, I'm going to stress that I really do appreciate the conversations, and islands have long been developing strategies, and it's quite important. But with that, we really need to just simply start acting and start deploying in as much as we can. And so lastly, to close up this point, to get around some of these barriers, we have actually identified particular projects in various member states, large-scale projects that we are willing and ready to take from cradle to grave. So really from concept down to the kilowatt hour being generated. So we have quite a few exciting opportunities coming. I could just mention a few countries. We have Suriname, Antigua. I already mentioned Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica, Belize, Guyana, and some of that is really connected to our planning process, so providing that IRRP support, which I guess, Racquel, we will get to in a minute.
Yes, actually, I wanted, when you were talking about, you're seeing a lot of gaps in the projects that you're looking at, and, basic things like identifying the site, which you would think would be sort of easy. Do you think that part of the issue is access to information? And is that information that CCREEE is now providing, or is it part of the application process versus just general information that you're publishing, so that people are aware, listen, if you're going to prepare a project, you need these basic things sorted out?
Luckily, as we established the facility, we left room for a validation period, and that really taught us a lot. So while we approach this with, I think, an ideal model, that we would be getting project concepts that were already leaning towards commercial viability. That is not our reality. And I think what it did for us is it really refocused how we approach providing that support, because I think at the end of the day, and I see some comments here about CARICOM not operating as it should. I'm not going to dispute that. What I'm here to say though is that, you know, we have come to the point, and I think CCREEE as a newer organization with a very high-powered team, and you know, some youthful and energetic staff members, we do recognize that, you know, if one thing is not working, then we really need to make that change. And so while we first started with that aspirational design of getting a project that is already conceptualized, we do realize that we have some pivoting to do in terms of the support that we provide that seems to be of dire need. So there is that gap. I believe it is a lack of information. Yes, I believe there is information, but it is a matter of making it available in the right spaces, in the right format. And so our CARICOM Energy Knowledge Hub, for example, has come in to fill in that gap. And within that, we have tools embedded. For example, we are in the process of developing what we first started calling a green finance toolkit, but we're now thinking of changing that to a sustainable energy toolkit. So making, and we're also, we have on our agenda from early next year, the establishment of a help desk. So that help desk and some of these mechanisms will help to bridge that gap so that we can address even the basics of what does a project concept look like, and that a developer should at the least have the capacity to provide a basic concept that we could help take further down to the pipeline.
That's a really interesting point. And we have already 24 questions in the Q&A, and I'm seeing a lot of questions coming up in the chat. The questions need, if you could please just port your questions over to the Q&A. The chat is just for you to discuss and to introduce yourselves. So if it's a question, we really need it in the Q&A. But I'm going to ask Justine, in your work, just to follow up on Charlin's point about providing information, to what extent do you guys provide the information about the replicability of the work that you're doing to help people to, again, to help people to move at scale and to learn from what you're doing?
Great question, Racquel. We are creating toolkits. The toolkit around our reproductive health clinic projects is just complete. So for all of our projects, all the lessons learned, all the takeaways, we've co-developed them with the clinics. So their emergency response checklists, everything that's required around the renewable energy component of those projects. So those toolkits, we're finding the best way to share them. We're creating a portal on our website for the Climate Resilience Initiative where they will be available. We're happy to share them with anyone that's interested, but around all aspects of our initiative, we're creating publicly available toolkits because we are learning ourselves along the way. And I think it is really important to share that information. We're also grateful for the university partnerships that we have. So finding ways to take that to scale, I think, is an important piece as well. And University of West Indies has just launched, you know, a climate resilience institute, which they'll be providing portals and opportunity for shared information. And we're really excited to be a part of that.
Excellent, excellent. All right. So I'm going to just ask David and Ray if there's anything else that you want to add to wrap up the conversation we've been having, because we're going to move to the Q&A now. And the questions are coming in fast and furious. A wide variety of questions, I might add. I'm seeing all sorts of things. But I'm delighted that people are having these various thoughts as we're having this conversation. So I'll go to David first and then to Ray, since you think we're beating up on the banks.
Well, I was going to beat up on the banks a little bit.
No, we're not going to get Ray to come back. And he was so enthusiastic. I really feel like there are lots of projects to be funded by Ray and the bank. Don't beat up on him.
No, I will. But I think we highlighted a lot of the challenges that are in the region. There are a lot of solutions out there. I agree with Charlin's point about we just have to take the steps that are necessary to make things happen. You know, breaking through the barriers is not easy. It's a learning curve for most of the institutions because it's been around a while, but it's still a relatively new market in terms of the energy sector and that transition. But there are solutions that are out there. There are islands that have demonstrated that these things can work. The one thing I would say is that, you know, talking about how we create processes that can be replicated. Well, that's what our goal and objective is, and we, we've done things like the energy transition playbook, how to get a project from start to finish. That's widely available and circulated on the web. We also have done like Solar on the Storm. So we do a lot of leadership in this space to make sure that we can share the learnings and all of the processes. We've done work on procurement and the electric vehicle transportation. There's so much information out there. So it's not a lack of information. I think we may have to help people get to the right information, but the information is there. I think it comes down to designing processes and systems that work together. And that's holistically, right? From the start, de-risking projects. We spend a lot of time in energy de-risking projects to get them through the pipeline, and then they're ready for financing. I think we need more collaboration. And there are a lot of ways we can do it. We got the blended finance opportunities that we ourselves are working on at RMI. We're partnering in Puerto Rico. We have a program that does works with commercial banks to bring them in early in the project phases so that they can understand exactly what the project risks are, so that they have more appetite to take on these projects. But a couple of things do need to happen. The cost of financing is too high in the region. It's just too high. It's not going to make these projects viable. So we need to bring that down. And we're trying to find a lot of different ways. And it's hard to pour out everything that we do here. I know there's probably a million things I'm missing, but the information is there. Tap into the knowledge that's out there. You can start by going to our website. You can start by reaching out to us, and we'll make sure to get you to the right places.
Well, tell us the web address, and what I can commit to do on behalf of the accelerator is serve as the connective tissue and make sure that we link to your toolkit, Clara, Lionel. I think that would be really excellent for us to be able to provide greater access to that kind of information, but just generally, link to the knowledge hub that CCREEE has, and certainly help to make sure that the information is as accessible as possible, because I think there is a great deal of information that's available. It's just that people are, I think, exhausted in trying to figure out what they need to do and where to find it. So if we can support that, that would be at least part of our contribution. So Ray.
Yeah, I mean, look, one thing I will say is that I work for a president. The managing director for our organization is very action oriented. One of the things that it's one of his big pet peeves is people that talk and don't have action, right? So he's always basically kind of championed this mantra that this is not just something we're announcing. We have to go out and do things. We want to do things. We've put down some markers in terms of where we want to go. We know our North Star. We know that we're going to struggle to get there based on the current, the current framework, but we're putting in place a lot of steps to help us to get there. And to the extent that we can have at least a community that can support us with either the technical knowledge or effectively kind of showing us opportunities that allow us to really meet some of these goals that we've laid down. Happy to kind of really work with you guys in that way. I mean, David said something that was very, very important is, I think, get the bankers involved very early, because you don't want to go through your process and then effectively produce a paper, give it to them and say, well, you have 6 to 8 weeks to effectively turn around an approval. It's just not, it just never ultimately leads to, I think, a good result, because they're going to have to spend some time to really understand it. So I think the earlier, in the process that you can engage with organizations like mine would obviously help, I think, maybe with a more desired result coming out on the other side of it. And we're happy to kind of roll up our sleeves and do some pro bono work in terms of helping you guys kind of put together structures as well.
All right. So Justine, I think you had mentioned the point about greater collaborations, and I see that here, so Ray is committing to collaboration with David and Charlin, and I appreciate that. And we are certainly committed to working with you guys, Ray, to not just identify the challenges and the barriers that we face, but also to identify some possible solutions. So where we can bring either relationships or technical assistance or philanthropic funding to be able to help projects get over the line, we are willing to work with all of you to support projects to make sure that we have greater project throughput, whether it is building resilience or building renewable energy independence for the region, because we think that is quite important. So now I want to jump into our 31 questions that we have. I am not going to answer all of them. I'm going to start with that so that it is clear. Okay, so let me see. Where do we start? I'm going to start at the top. Oh, Mark, wonderful. So Mark's question is the impact of hurricane, and hi, Mark. The impact of Hurricane Maria on Dominica wiped out both electrical and telecommunications infrastructure. More resilient infrastructure will be based on distributed electrical resources using solar, wind, or geothermal, some of which are co-located and servicing the telco core network rather than national grids. This would enhance resilience and create an opportunity for DER providers, which would be electricity as a service. This requires new players or a change in the country electricity provider model. So I guess the question is, what does it require and how do we move to that kind of model? And is that what we see as sort of a low-hanging fruit in terms of the problem to solve? I think this is probably best suited for you, David, having come out of heading up Angola's electricity.
You don't mind, just repeat the last part of that question to make sure.
So he's saying that, okay, in order, the Hurricane Maria wiped out both telecommunications as well as electricity. And in order to avoid something like that, to build resilience, there would need to be, new ways of establishing sort of distributed electrical resources using different kinds of technologies. And, whether taking this approach to saying, listen, we can't be both out of electricity and telecommunications. Does it require new players? He's suggesting electricity as a service, or does it require a change in the electricity provider model so that we're working with electricity as a service, for example?
Yeah, it requires a substantial change in the model. I can relate to that one very well because we had the same challenge with Irma and Anguilla in 2017. And Anguilla was a perfect example. And we've seen that example repeated in Abaco in the Bahamas and various other places. And that is, not every part of an island, although we're small, gets hit the same with the hurricane. So certain parts of the island may be unaffected. So our strategy involves building out distributed microgrids. And Justine sort of spoke to it a little earlier in terms of the program that we've partnered on. But we first look at critical facilities, and we actually look at geographic dispersion of energy resources. So if one side of the island is less impacted by a storm, having a facility located, a generation source, a facility located in that part of the island allows that part of the island to come back much faster. And if you have it at a critical facility, it allows that facility, a hospital or clinic or a shelter, to operate independently of the grid while the grid is being restored. That also enables communities to gather and have that resource available at that facility during those times of distress. And I could attest to that because after Hurricane Irma, I'm telling you, just to keep my phone charged was a nightmare. And I was the CEO of the utility.
Wow. Wow. All right. So from Robert McKay, and thank you, Robert. The essential question is, unlocking ocean energy offers a huge, potentially low-cost path to energy independence. Have islands looked into such projects and their development? And I'm going to ask Charlin whether or not you've seen any or many ocean energy projects, or are we considering that too experimental? I know that you mentioned earlier that there is an economic opportunity to be had. So I think it'd be great for you to look at this question.
Sure, thank you. In fact, we hosted I believe 2 years ago, the region's very first marine technology conference in Grenada. And we have received about 2 project proposals that looked at wave energy, though again, some of the building blocks were really not together. Yes, it is an emerging technology, but we have left space in our work program for that. And what I can say is, and I think she's connected, so let me just say hello to Dr. Legina Henry from UWI. We're working very closely through our thematic hubs. And in fact, ocean energy development is something that we're en route to looking at and providing some input for our support to our member states, more so through a regional program. And we have a number of partners. Let me just mention the CBB, very committed to developing ocean technology along with the CCREEE.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. So the next question from my Hilarion sister, Kimberlyn Bacchus. Most of the focus on switching to sustainable transport seems to be on the importation and sale of electric vehicles. Are any attempts being made to improve the public mass transit systems that exist in the region and upgrade the vehicles in those systems to sustainable ones? I know that there's a lot taking place in Barbados, but I wanted to open the floor, and a lot as well happening in Bermuda in terms of the public transportation system and moving those to electric vehicles. But I did want to open up the floor if there are any other examples that you've seen that you want to speak to. Charlin, David, Ray, any examples of electrifying the public transportation system?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ambition and pronouncements that are out there. They haven't sort of built the basic infrastructure to start from 0 to 10. And what happens, the islands you mentioned, of course, Barbados, Bermuda in particular. I mean, I can speak to the Bermuda example, but just like renewable energy needs to be integrated into the grid, and there needs to be a plan and a coordinated process to make that happen. The same thing needs to happen with the transformation of the transportation sector. You need the support infrastructure. But the one thing I want to say, because you'll hear a lot of the discussion happening, say, in the US, where you have, thousands and thousands, I don't even know in terms of the miles and square miles of the US, but you're talking about a very different concept than transforming the energy sector in Anguilla, for example. Your average commute is only going to be about 5 to 6 miles in Anguilla on a daily basis. You don't need the same infrastructure that you're going to have in any state, any given state across the US. So that's not as concerning for the Caribbean region. Different islands, different needs, okay? So I'm not going to generalize everything, but there is a great opportunity and lots of room for us to make great impact quickly. And then we can worry about the infrastructure challenges on the back end because we have time to build into that.
Racquel, I mean, if I could jump in, I wouldn't
Yes.
talk about public transportation, but I could talk about, I think, one of the areas that we're looking at effectively affecting some change. So we obviously see a push towards EVs coming from a lot of the auto car companies. We think that probably creates, in terms of a mitigation, climate mitigation, some of the most meaningful impact in some of the jurisdictions in which we operate, especially these island states. So we've obviously rolled out electric vehicle loans, but what's missing is obviously the infrastructure, the charging stations. So we've been looking to see how we can partner with private sector. We are the landowners of a lot of real estate. We have obviously a lot of car parks adjacent to our banks. We're looking at piloting as to how we can use some of that to form part of it. We're also we finance a lot of car parks but in the private sector as well, potentially partnering with some of them to really kind of sponsor a particular section in their car parks really for EVs. Because we think the infrastructure, and I was actually doing some research last week in terms of, like you need about 1 charging station for every 17 cars, I think is generally the benchmark that's used in Europe, which is obviously leading the way right now. So we're starting to look at how we can obviously increase the proportion of EVs that are coming into many of these jurisdictions. And then on the infrastructure side, actually finance the actual infrastructure through our clients, our private clients, and then potentially with some governments, primarily because obviously the key aspect to any charging station is going to be you have to collaborate with the utility to understand the specs and to make sure that it's done in a very safe way. So that's one of the ways that we're thinking about it from a private sector standpoint in terms of transportation.
Okay, great. And we've been in a lot of conversations, Curacao, in terms of their rollout of their public charging model. I think it's been really innovative. We would love to introduce you to talk about their model, because they have quite an extensive vehicle charging infrastructure, and they don't have very many electric cars, but they are being, proactive in terms of by having the charging stations built and how they're doing that. So we'd be happy to introduce you to those guys. Justine, we've had quite a few questions come in for you from the beginning, but I'm just getting down to that now. And so one of the questions is, what impact investment models have you looked into, and have you guys explored impact investment at all in your models? And that question is from Rick Warner, my task force brother.
It is definitely on the horizon for us for exploration. We wanted to get a number of pilots under our belt before looking at that scalability. I think we've been looking at traditional scalability financing, so looking at governments both in the Caribbean, but also governments such as Norway and Canada that have expressed interest in investing in climate resilience. But I think impact investing is another piece of that. And, we welcome support in really thinking about how we model that out. Every island, as you know, is so different. So to try to create a model of scale that is pan-Caribbean, I think will be a unique challenge, but we welcome any support in trying to figure out how we take these projects to scale.
Okay, so we have only 4 minutes remaining, and more questions have come in, but I will still power through as many as we can get through in that time. Gina Henry, my other Hilarion sister, thank you for pointing that out. She asks, do we see more resources coming towards climate projects in the wake of all the agreements that were made at the key meetings at COP last week? Gina, my answer is, I really hope so. I really hope so. We expect to see some good things, but I think the announcement we heard on Friday that I think is even more important than the commitments that have been made is that the UN is going to initiate a mechanism to start measuring how the commitments are being implemented, so that there is clarity for the activists and for people who are paying attention, and to make sure that people keep paying attention, that we understand what the major milestones are. And I will do my other major celebrity name drop. We had a meeting with President Obama yesterday, and in that meeting we talked about keeping the focus on the projects and the commitments that have been made, and making sure that there is follow through for action. He has met with activists, he's met with community groups, he's met with leaders, and trying to help them all to move towards the implementation of these actions. And even in the implementation, they're not always necessarily the best fit. So, we have to believe that this is possible, but we also have to maintain the pressure to ensure that it becomes possible. And so with that, I'm going to ask this question nonetheless. It's for you, Justine, again, but what are some of the challenges for that CLF? Well, actually, I'm going to say the question and I'm going to move on, because I think it's a bit controversial for you to answer, but it's asking, what are the challenges for CLF from island governments? And so, we typically don't want to get into fights with island governments by pointing out what are the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. I'm really appreciating all the questions and the comments. It's really great to see such a community around this conversation. I think, again, every government is facing its own challenges. I'd say there's lack of financing in general in the region. And so, taking these projects to scale has been interesting. I'd also say, transparently, working on reproductive health clinics every country has different rules and regulations around reproductive health and reproductive health access. So, we, again, wanting to make sure that advocacy is a piece of this, that is a consideration. And we have partners that are working on the advocacy side of some of that rights access stuff. So maybe that's an even more controversial answer, but yeah, I mean, it's, I think there's many layers to the challenges. But I think, again, recognizing the unique realities of the Caribbean and finding ways to collaborate with government where possible, I think is absolutely necessary.
And Ray, I'm going to ask you, a number of questions came in for you. So the last question that I will pose will be a multifaceted question to you. One question that came in from Andrew, who's a former coworker of mine. He was asking about what kinds of, are you doing funding for, are you willing to provide financing for startups in the climate space? But the other thing that someone else asked about that I thought was really a great question is, where can we see the responsible banking, the UN principles for responsible banking and Republic Bank's sort of commitment? Is that somehow publicly available that we can take a look at to understand what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the last question first. So I last week signed off. So we're kind of in reporting period. Happy to announce that part of our annual report will have an entire section on our PRB commitment, where it effectively outlines all of the different financing activities. We've actually listed them out into 3 segments: retail, commercial, and corporate. So you actually can reference it in our annual report that will be published, I think, within the next week or so. And that's readily available on our website. And again, if you follow many of our announcements, you'll see any updates to that commitment as well. And absolutely, we're looking at financing startups through innovative debt facilities. So obviously, because we are a regulated bank, we are limited in terms of what we can do from an equity perspective, but we can get quite creative with debt. We can really support, I think, startup businesses with working capital lines, with CapEx, and really make the terms flexible enough that it looks and it feels almost like equity.
Nice.
So yeah, absolutely willing to do that as well.
Perfect. I want to thank all of you guys, Justine, David, Charlin, Ray, for a really rich and exciting discussion. I think it is clear that there's a lot happening in this space, and we have you to thank for a lot of what's taking place. We support your work. I know that there are a lot of questions. I'm going to find out from Christian whether we can sort of download those questions and answer them over the course of the next week on social media, so that we're at least responding to all of the inquiries that have come in. But I really, really thank you. And we are committed to making things happen and increasing the momentum. And certainly by highlighting your work, I think we have a great chance of doing that. So thank you all so very, very much for joining us in this discussion, and our panelists for joining us on this panel. I really appreciated it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Racquel.